The wind blew hard, raising spirals of dust that crawled across the dry ground of Arizona. Between the reddish rocks and the distant sound of crows, Luke Carver rode his buckskin horse along a trail almost erased by time. There were no signs, no markers, only the crooked trace of a path that few dared to follow. In the dusty saloon of the last town he had passed through, he had heard whispered stories, heavy with fear. They spoke of an old mine closed for decades, where men had vanished without a trace. Some swore the gold was still there, trapped in the belly of the mountain, gleaming for anyone brave or foolish enough to enter. Luke didn't see himself as a greedy man. What drove him wasn't the promise of riches, but the mystery. Since boyhood, he had always been drawn to the unknown, to what lay beyond the last bend in the road. And now that forgotten tunnel seemed to call to him in an almost personal way. With each step his horse took, the image of the mine grew sharper in his mind, a black hole carved into the rock, guarding secrets no one had dared to reveal. The silence of the desert followed him, heavy, strange, as if even the wind hesitated to cross that territory. When the slope opened up, revealing the mine's entrance, Luke stopped. Old rotting planks sealed the passage, held by rusted iron braces. On the wood, faded letters carried a warning that time had not erased: "Keep away." He stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. Anyone else would have turned back. To Luke, it was an invitation. He dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the thick dust. Adjusting his hat against the low sun, he walked to the boards. The smell of rotting wood mixed with the scent of rust. With a firm shove, he felt the first plank crack, letting out a loud snap that was swallowed by the vast emptiness around him. Another blow, and another plank gave way, until the mouth of the mine yawned open, breathing out a cold gust, thick with damp earth and something metallic. Before him, the darkness seemed to have a life of its own. It was so dense, Luke felt that with his first step, he wouldn't just be entering a tunnel. He would be crossing into another world. And even with his heart racing, he knew he wouldn't turn back. The weak light of his lantern flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the narrow walls. The air inside was heavy, stifling, carrying the scent of damp soil and ancient rust. Each of Luke's steps echoed hollow and far away, as if the mine itself were listening. The walls, scratched with old pickaxe marks, told the silent story of men who had worked there decades before. Forgotten tools, rusted, broken, some wedged into cracks in the rock, rested against the walls. As he went deeper, Luke began noticing unsettling details. Twisted rail tracks lay scattered on the ground, small mine carts tipped on their sides, their once solid wheels now encrusted in thick rust. It didn't look like a natural abandonment. There was something rushed, almost desperate, in the way everything had been left behind. The dim beam lit the hard-packed dirt floor, revealing what looked like human footprints. Some headed toward the exit, others disappeared deeper into the darkness. They were old, yet strangely preserved, as if no one had set foot there since the day the mine closed. Luke crouched, brushing his fingers over one of the prints, feeling the hardened earth beneath. It was like touching a frozen moment in time. He kept walking, each step making the air feel heavier. The absolute silence was broken by a distant sound, a slow metallic scrape, repetitive, like something dragging against stone. Luke froze, straining to hear. The noise stopped, leaving a silence even more suffocating. Then it came again, slightly louder. He moved forward, driven by both tension and a burning curiosity. Turning a narrow corner, he spotted a miner's helmet on the ground, its side caved in by a deep dent. Beside it lay a silver chain with an oval pendant, darkened by time. Luke picked it up, feeling the cold metal in his palm, and slipped it into his pocket, as if it were a crucial piece of a puzzle he didn't yet understand. The tunnel widened ahead, opening into a large chamber. The ceiling, high and jagged, was split with cracks, chunks of stone hanging like fangs ready to fall. In the center lay a wide, circular pit, ringed by rotting planks and ancient ropes that looked ready to crumble at a touch. Luke stepped closer and felt it, a gust of icy air rising from the depths. Not just cold, but freezing, biting, as if from a place where the sun had never existed. The wind carried a sharp, metallic smell, like dried blood, and something else, something that made him shiver. And then, in the low murmur of the draught, he heard it. It wasn't his imagination, nor an echo. It was a drawn-out, almost human whisper that seemed to shape his name. Luke. The sound came from the pit's depths, far beyond where his lantern light could reach. For an instant, Luke thought about stepping back. But as always with him, fear and the pull of the unknown mixed into that dangerous feeling that pushed him forward. He knew that from here on, each step would take him past the point of no return. He stepped back once, forcing air into his lungs as if it could push the fear away. He told himself it was just wind trapped in the cracks, the pit acting like an old organ playing false notes as the current passed through. But then the lantern swung, and something glinted near the edge, a small bar caked in thick dust. Luke crouched, brushed away loose stones with his fingers, and lifted the metal. It was gold, no doubt. Heavy, cold, dense. The weight wasn't just in his muscles. It felt as though he was holding a piece of the history of the men who had been here before him, a remnant of broken will. For a moment, the thrill of finding what so many had sought nearly overwhelmed him. Then, a dry ache gripped his chest, like a hand squeezing his lungs. He shoved the bar into his saddlebag and realized the silence around him had changed. It was no longer empty, but watchful, as if the mine had felt his act and did not approve. The lantern trembled in his grip. Luke walked slowly, marking the wall with his knife so he wouldn't lose his way. He carved an X on a smooth patch, went a few more yards, turned a bend, and purely by instinct, looked back. The X wasn't there. The stone showed only old scratches, pickaxe marks, and streaks of moisture. He touched the spot where he swore he'd made the cut. The knife's dull tip couldn't find the groove. He swallowed hard. That wasn't possible. He carved again, deeper this time, leaving a larger mark, and moved on. The tunnel bulged like a belly, and then narrowed like a throat, before opening into another shaft that sloped downward. The air, once heavy, now carried a sweet, almost rotten smell. Luke recognized scents from other mines, wet timber, iron, rotting potatoes, and something else, a faint whiff of gas, the kind that makes a flame stretch like a tongue. He held the lantern farther from his face and moved cautiously, counting his steps to distract from his anxiety. To the left, he found a tipped-over cart. The rusted iron, lacy with decay, looked like diseased skin. Inside were dirt and stones. Next to it, a canvas jacket so stiff it snapped when he touched it. A leather wallet fell out, which he opened with steady fingers despite his trembling. Inside was a folded piece of paper, half clean, half caked with dried mud. A short, almost erased name was still legible, E. Ramos. The silver pendant in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. He pulled it out, checked the markings, a simple relief, a thin cross, and 2 letters stamped into the back. E.R. Luke's chest tightened. He returned the pendant to his pocket, as if storing a cry for help he couldn't ignore. The tunnel groaned in its timber braces. Old beams creaked under the thin wind, slipping in and out through unseen cracks. Luke heard an irregular drip and raised the light. The ceiling was sweating, and where the water fell, the rock was darker. The sound was like a faulty clock, off rhythm. The dripping shifted position without him moving. It wasn't just echo. It was as if the mine was playing tricks on his ears. He pressed on. The feeling of eyes on his back grew. He would stop, holding his breath, and the sound of footsteps behind him would stop too. He'd walk, and again the same rhythm, 1 pace behind, followed him. Twice, maybe 3 times, he spun around too quickly and nearly dropped the lantern. Nothing but thick shadow, like motionless smoke. On the ground, near a crossroads of tunnels, he found bones. Not a full skeleton, pieces, a boot still with a foot inside, dried skin clinging to the leather, a belt with its metal eaten away. Beside them, a short pickaxe with a wooden handle gnawed by teeth, as if someone had faced hunger and agony down here. Luke took off his hat for a moment. He didn't pray, he never was one for prayers, but murmured a sorry to the rock and the dead, as if stepping uninvited into a stranger's home. He placed the boot beside the belt, aligned what remained, and moved on. The next tunnel felt like another world. Cold seeped up from the ground, through his soles, straight into his bones. When the flame flared blue for an instant, Luke held the lantern away, remembering the gas. He walked with his arm extended, keeping the light high, using the other hand to feel the walls like a blind man needing to know where the corridor ended, and the drop began. The texture changed, from rough stone to smooth, polished by constant touch. Then came the marks. Hands, many hands, as if desperate men had searched for a way out, scraping and clawing. The oldest marks were shallow, the newest deep. In one, scratched with nail or knife, a single short word, back. Luke stopped. His whole body told him to obey. But back to where? The crossroads, the shifting tunnels, the disappearing X? He leaned his forehead lightly against the rock, savoring the simple, honest pain that wasn't a trick or the wind. A memory came uninvited. His younger brother Ben, face smeared with dust, smiling with that crooked grin. People say it was the last time. One day under another stretch of earth, another mine-mouth and the blast that shouldn't have happened. Luke had heard the crack, felt the ground shake, ran, dug, screamed until he lost his voice. He never found Ben whole. His father used to say the earth has a hunger for men. Luke had spent years pretending it didn't apply to him, that he could come and go from the mountain's mouth with an agreement only he understood. Now, that agreement seemed broken. He walked a few more yards. A low haze filled the tunnel, a fine dust suspended in the air, glittering in the light like silver. His chest hurt again. Only then did he realize he was holding his breath without meaning to. He exhaled slowly, lowered the lantern toward the ground to see what he was stepping on. Bits of newspaper were glued to a beam. He scraped carefully, trying to save the letters. He managed to read fragments. Accident, 5 dead. Foreman, order to close. The dates matched the stories from the saloon. There was more, scrawled in pencil over the newspaper. Take nothing else from here. The scraping sound returned, this time closer. It was methodical, like someone dragging a metal object across rock in even intervals. Luke planted his feet, raised the lantern, waited. The sound stopped. In the darkness ahead, something caught the light for a fraction of a second. 2 points. In Luke's mind, they became eyes. The flame wavered. He took a step, and the points vanished. Silence again. And under that silence, a thread of voice tugged at his name, clearer now, almost offended. It didn't sound like wind. It had the cadence of speech, an accent he didn't recognize. The pendant in his pocket warmed like a coin in the sun. Luke touched the metal through the fabric and felt a tingling climb up his arm. The name he had read earlier pressed again at his thoughts. E. Ramos. What if the chain still had an owner? He saw the glint of metal again, now on the floor between 2 stones. They looked like twin nuggets. He bent down, brought the light closer, and saw they weren't nuggets at all. They were silver teeth, the kind some miners had made when a tooth rotted. They were bound together with a copper wire. He pulled on the wire, and the stone above shifted slightly. Behind it, a narrow hole appeared like a passage dug in haste. The air that came out was icy, blowing the lantern's flame and raising goosebumps like a dead man's touch. Luke thought about turning back. His whole body seemed to lean away, but curiosity held his spine firm. He dropped the silver teeth, adjusted the lantern, and wedged his shoulder into the gap. On the other side, the gallery was wider, the ceiling high and dark like a starless sky. The sound of running water came faintly from somewhere to the right. The floor, smoother, still had intact rails, but coated in a sticky, fine dust that clung to the leather of his boots. Motionless carts stood in line like tombs. In one, he saw claw marks along the rim. 4 parallel gouges torn into the metal, the last one stopping midway. Luke's chest tightened. He ran his fingers along the grooves. The lantern lit up, a short distance ahead, a wooden frame hanging crooked. Nailed to it was a list of names. Almost all were crossed out with a thick X. At the bottom, one last line, no X, Emilio Ramos. The pen stroke had smeared into a blot, as if the hand had been yanked away mid-mark. Gradually, the sounds began to blend together. Drips, scrapes, sighs of wind, all piling into his ears. Luke found himself speaking softly, as if explaining to the mind that he wanted nothing but the truth. He said he'd leave the gold, that he understood the warning. Was it a complete lie? Maybe. But what he wanted most now was to find a clear thread through the tangle of fear. At every bend, he saw people in the shadows, and when he fixed his gaze, they melted into support beams. At every pause, his heartbeat rose into his throat, certain something was breathing just 2 feet behind him. When exhaustion began to chip away at his will, the mind changed its tone. The scraping turned into knocking, 3 short raps, 1 long, 3 short, repeated in the same rhythm. Some old memory of Morse code patterns tapped at his brain. He tried to recall the letters. Nothing came whole, only the sensation of a request. He found a stick, tapped back twice short and once long at random. The echo came back with fury, as if whatever was on the other side didn't appreciate games. Luke regretted the gesture, but he was no longer in control. With each reply, the mind seemed to gain substance. The ground trembled faintly. The beams groaned like weary creatures. His body craved water. His mouth tasted of metal. He set the lantern on a stone, pulled out his canteen, and wet his lips carefully, measuring each sip. The post-sip silence was so intense he could hear his own blood. And over that sound came something else, a dry, persistent cough, the kind of cough an old man gets when there's no cure left. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. Luke rose without finishing the water, stowed the canteen, and the cough came again, followed by a word that might have been cold, or sun. The pendant warmed once more. He followed the cough, turning into a smaller tunnel. The walls sparkled with tiny crystals. The air grew colder. The lantern's flame narrowed like a snake's tongue, nearly going out for a second. Luke shielded the glass with his hand, moving slowly, and entered a low-ceilinged room where old wooden workbenches still held scraps of tools. There was a diary there, open, its pages stiff with age. He read the first legible line. "If they dig further, they will wake what does not sleep." At the bottom was a simple drawing, a circle with 4 marks. The same symbol appeared, repeated on the walls behind the benches drawn in charcoal. His heartbeat matched the mind's knocking rhythm. Luke understood it wasn't just gold sleeping here. There was a story trapped, a wrong choice made, a limit crossed. The bar in his saddlebag weighed like guilt. The chain in his pocket seemed to pull, calling for his hand. He took it out, gripped the pendant, and did what he had always done in bad times, forced himself to take one more step. The tunnel ahead looked too narrow for a man, but the darkness, heavy as lead, parted like a curtain as he approached, and in the depths of that curtain, for a brief instant, the shadow of a man took shape, hunched shoulders, head bowed, hand tapping slowly on stone, before dissolving into the cold. Luke knew, without knowing how, that the story no one had told was about to speak to him, and that listening would come with a price. Luke stood still for long seconds, absorbing every detail of that hidden chamber deep in the earth's belly. Crystals scattered a pale, cold light, as if the mine itself had a heart beating silently. The glow reflected off gold coins and jewels, creating tiny golden sparks that danced across the walls. But what unsettled him most wasn't the immeasurable value of what he saw. It was the feeling that none of it was there by accident. The masks, with empty eyes and open mouths, seemed frozen in the moment of a silent scream. The carved figures, made of stone and dark wood, had features Luke couldn't place in any culture he knew. Some looked vaguely human, others did not. He approached slowly, the air growing colder with every step. His breath left in short clouds, and the silence was so complete that even the beating of his heart felt like an intruder. He touched one of the coins, just to confirm it was real, and instantly felt a shiver run down his spine, as if something had noticed his gesture. He stepped back instinctively, but his eyes stayed locked on the altar. Among the treasures, he noticed objects that didn't belong. Ancient tools, shards of pottery, a piece of fabric with dark stains, and a necklace made of teeth. This wasn't just treasure, it was a mound of offerings. Thomas Grady's journal was still in his hand, open to the last page. Luke read the scribbled line again. "What we found must not be disturbed." The warning now felt less like superstition and more like a sentence carved in blood. Fear and fascination mixed inside him. Part of him wanted to run, to leave this place and forget he had ever seen it. But another part, deeper, wanted to understand. Why hide something like this? Who had brought these offerings? And most of all, why did the masks seem more alive the longer he looked at them? He circled the altar, studying everything closely. That's when he noticed the floor's pattern, smooth, polished stones forming a perfect circle around the altar. On the edges of the circle, marks identical to those in the journal, the same circle with 4 lines symbol. When he stepped inside, a low, distant sound rippled through the air like a murmur from far away, reverberating off the walls. Luke froze, trying to decide if it was just the echo of his own steps or something answering his presence. The air seemed to vibrate for a moment, and he swore one of the crystals changed color, glowing orange like fire trapped inside stone. The carved figures on the walls cast shadows that stretched and shifted, even though he hadn't moved the lantern. Luke clenched his fist, took a deep breath, and tried to shake off the thoughts. But there was something here that couldn't be explained by drafts or tricks of light. It was then he realized something important. Up until now, his search for the mine had been driven by curiosity and the instinct to uncover the unknown. But standing in that chamber, the feeling changed. It wasn't about exploring anymore or finding riches. It was about understanding what this place meant. Something in him was shifting, as if he were standing before a silent choice. He thought of his brother Ben and the promise he had never dared speak aloud, that he would never again step into a mine without knowing what he was walking into. He also remembered the stories from the old men in the saloon, of miners who vanished in their greed and were never seen again. Now he understood why. It wasn't just the gold that kept men trapped down here. It was the feeling of being in the presence of something greater than themselves, something they could neither explain nor own. When he touched one of the masks, it was warm, as if someone had worn it minutes earlier. The empty gaze seemed to follow his own, and for a moment, Luke felt he was not alone in the chamber. His heart pounded, but he didn't step back. He knew that if he truly wanted to understand what was in this mine, he would have to face this unseen presence. As he stood there, another kind of wealth began to take shape before him. Not material, but knowledge. This could be a fragment of a story far older than any town in the West. Perhaps the mine had been dug over something sacred, and the gold was only a disguise, a lure to draw the greedy inside. The true power of this place lay in what it represented, and that left him torn. Part of Luke wanted to leave with a handful of coins, tell his story, and live the rest of his days as a rich man. But another part knew that if he took something, he might never have peace again. The dilemma grew heavier by the second. He knew he wasn't the first to face this choice. The bones along the way, the warnings in the journal, all pointed to the same truth. Everyone who had tried to take what they shouldn't had paid far too high a price. Yet the gold still gleamed before him like an irresistible promise. Almost without realizing, Luke began speaking aloud. He murmured questions, as if the chamber might answer. Who put this here? Why? What happened to you? The darkness seemed to draw closer, as if listening. He realized he was calmer now. The fear was still there, but mixed with a strange clarity. He was learning more about himself than about the mine. He was discovering his limits, understanding the weight of the choices he made. And so, for the first time since entering this place, Luke considered leaving without taking anything. Not because he didn't want the gold, but because it might be the only way to honor those who had remained here forever. Deep down, he felt the true worth of his discovery wasn't in the shine of the coins, but in the silent meaning they carried. Only before he could decide, he needed to know one last thing: whether the chamber was truly empty, or if something was watching, waiting for his next move. Luke reached out slowly, like a man testing cold river water, and his fingertips brushed a coin on the altar's top. The metal answered with a hard gleam, and at the same time, a deep grinding rolled through the walls like distant thunder. He froze. The sound came again, closer now, heavy, gritty, like stone rubbing against stone. He turned just in time to see the opening he had entered through lose the faint crystal light and seal shut in a perfect fit, without a gap. The lantern trembled in his hand. The chamber seemed smaller, his breath shorter. Luke searched for another exit, but before he could take a step, He heard a slow patient dragging across the floor, as if something had woken after a long sleep and was relearning the weight of its own body. He raised the lantern, scanning the corners. The light swept over masks, the teeth of shadows, crystals that seemed to breathe. The dragging came again, this time joined by a wet sound like fabric sticking to wounded flesh. For a second, the flame revealed a shape near one of the pillars, a shoulder set too high, an arm hanging crooked, the light burning in 2 points that could have been eyes. Luke took 2 steps back and nearly touched the altar, feeling its cold edges at his spine. The figure advanced with jerky movements, like a weary man who'd forgotten how to walk. The miner's uniform, or what was left of it, hung in strips. The skin, where there was skin, had the color of sunless stone. The tilted head showed one side of the face sagging lower, as if bone had melted and hardened in the wrong place. The eyes were not real eyes, but shining pools where the lantern's flame repeated itself, multiplied like in cracked glass. Luke tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His body wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature let out a sound that began as an animal's growl and ended in a raspy exhale that, for a moment, seemed to form syllables. He heard cold or sun again, the same word that had reached him in the tunnels, and the pendant in his pocket answered with a strange heat, a heat that didn't burn skin but filled his hand with courage. On impulse, Luke plunged his hand into his pocket, yanked out the silver chain, wrapped it around his fist, and raised the lantern with the other. The creature came. The fight was short and desperate, the kind memory keeps only in fragments. The first blow, with the lantern, struck the crooked shoulder. The creature stepped back, not from pain, but from the fire. Luke noticed, swung his arm with the chain, and struck the thing's chest like a loop of iron. The metal rang sharp in the chamber's silence, and when the silver touched flesh, the creature let out a long, high cry that seemed to come from no throat at all. The crystals trembled, the air shook, the floor quaked under his boots. Luke backed away and struck again, this time at the arm reaching for him like a claw. The chain bit deep, and the smell of something burning, sweet and foul, filled his nose. The arm recoiled in a spasm, slamming into the altar and scattering coins that rolled across the floor like an iron rain. The stone door didn't move, but the chamber answered the creature's scream with sharp cracks overhead, dust falling in veils. The thing retreated into the shadow of the column, like an animal that had learned what hurt. Luke didn't give his courage time to fade. He took 2 steps, twisted his wrist, and swung the chain again, this time like a rancher roping a calf. The silver struck its misshapen neck, and the scream began anew, breaking into jagged notes until it collapsed into a breathless whisper. For an instant, the face turned toward him looked human, a mask of flesh filled with fear and exhaustion. Luke saw the remnants of a man who had once been a miner, the uneven outline of a patchy beard, one whole ear on the less collapsed side, even the flash of a silver tooth like the ones he'd found in the tunnels. What he felt wasn't pity, it was understanding. This thing wasn't guarding gold, it was guarding what was left of itself and of others who had remained. The creature tried another approach, sliding behind the carved figures on the wall and reappearing on the opposite side in a quick move, throwing itself at Luke sideways like flesh-learning strategy. They went down together. The lantern flew, but Luke caught the handle before the glass could shatter. He shielded the flame with his palm as the cold weight crushed him. His free hand fumbled for the chain, found it, and looped the silver around the base of the creature's neck, yanking with all his strength. He felt the skin give, warm slime coating his fingers. The cry now was lower, older, as if it came from a mouth that had forgotten how to scream. Luke drove his knee upward, gained space, and in one motion was on his feet again. The creature tried to follow, but the silver kept it stumbling. In the seconds that followed, the fight turned into a clumsy dance. He struck when there was an opening, retreated when the enemy's shadow swelled behind the masks, advanced again when the crystals lit a patch of exposed flesh. Time dissolved. There was only the rhythm of his own heartbeat, the ache in his wrist from gripping the chain, and the burn in his throat with each short breath. At some point, he understood. He wouldn't win by defeating it. The entire chamber seemed to protect whatever the altar held, and he was just a tired man in a place that wasn't his. He needed to get out. Scanning the room like a man searching for water in the desert, his eyes caught a series of tall, narrow cracks between larger crystals, like window slits. They didn't look like doors, but a different kind of air moved through them, less rotten. Luke pushed toward them, the creature crossing his path like a starved dog. He swung the silver again, striking it in the chest. The thing recoiled, crashing into one of the masks. The mask fell and shattered, revealing a niche behind it, and in the niche, a neat bundle of bones laid there with care. A simple ring rolled free, initials stamped inside. In a flash of light, Luke read them. T.G. Thomas Grady, the foreman. This wasn't a gold sanctuary. It was a graveyard of broken promises. The sight chilled his gut. The creature seized the moment, lunging low and seizing his ankle. Luke went down hard, shoulder slamming into the ground, a short cry breaking into anger. With his free heel, he kicked the creature's head, feeling the strange mix of soft and rigid, like weathered leather stretched too tight. His hand found the chain again, another loop around his fist, one hard yank, and the arm clutching his leg let go. He rolled, sprang to his feet without grace, and ran for the cracks. The first was too narrow, his chest wouldn't pass. The second had a stone step at its base, making the opening higher. Luke shoved his shoulder in, feeling his shirt tear and skin scrape raw. Behind him, the creature dragged itself forward, leaving a dark trail on the floor, a trail that hissed and smoked when it touched the scattered coins. He braced himself, sucked in a breath as if diving, and squeezed through until his bones protested. The lantern scraped the crystal and nearly went out, but by some stubborn miracle it stayed lit. On the other side, the passage was a narrow vein climbing upward, stones worn into natural steps. Luke climbed 2, 3, 4 steps, gasping. The dragging behind him echoed louder, more furious now, and between that sound and his own breathing, he heard another voice, clearer, younger, calling his name like a brother in the dark. For a second, the urge to look back nearly broke him. He didn't. He pressed on in blind stubbornness, using the chain now as a guide, the lantern as a pocket sun, Thomas Grady's journal clutched against his chest beneath his vest. The passage narrowed with each turn. At one point his hat caught on the low ceiling. He ripped it off and left it behind. The silver burned against his wrist as if demanding to be used again. The vein curved left and opened into a small round space with a low ceiling. An old ventilation shaft, maybe, with rotting beams crossing a dark hole above. The air smelled of daylight. Luke's heart leapt. He lifted the lantern and saw the beams tremble at the slightest touch. He'd have to climb exactly where everything might collapse. The creature reached the last bend. The dragging became frantic thuds, the crack behind him swelling with an oily glow, as if shadow itself were trying to force its way through. Luke slipped the lantern into the leather pouch on his chest, careful not to snuff it out, threw the chain over the first beam, tested it with a pull, and climbed, his whole body screaming in protest. The wood sang in a long, splintering note. One level up, hands burning, fingers sliding through dust, he pulled again. Below, an arm emerged through the crack, long grey fingers groping like spiders for something to claw. Luke yanked once more, the beam cracking loud, a cloud of dust stinging his eyes. He climbed blind, tears mixing with grit. At the penultimate beam, he felt the chain bite his wrist and the metal sear his skin like a coal. The pain was clear, necessary. It pulled his mind into focus. Wrapping the silver around the beam, he used it as a stirrup and hauled himself upward, slamming his shoulder into the rotted ceiling. The wood gave way in a square, and daylight knifed through. Hot air, glittering dust, the blue of the sky like a promise. Below, the creature writhed, trying to force itself through the gap, but something held it back, as if the mine itself rejected its body. Luke didn't stay to thank the mountain. He rolled through the hole, tearing his shirt on a nail, feeling the sun on his face and the taste of warm earth in his mouth. Still on his belly, he crawled away from the opening before turning over, lantern protected, journal pinned under his chest, chain dangling from his fist like a tired serpent. The hole exhaled a cold wind that fought with the sun. No arm appeared, no deformed face. Only the mine's breathing, a slow, low tide, as if the mountain, seeing he had left without gold, would let him go. Luke lay there, listening to the blood in his own ears, until his body remembered it belonged to him. He rose slowly, feeling every muscle. The hole was on a rocky plateau, a few meters above the old entrance. In the distance, the desert breathed in the heat, the sky holding thin clouds. Everything looked normal, and that normal hurt with its beauty. The silver pendant weighed in his hand. He opened it, expecting a photo, a clipping, something. Inside was a single lock of dark hair, curled like a memory. On the back, besides the initials, a crooked scratch of a cross. Luke closed it carefully and hung it around his neck. The metal felt cooler there, almost content. He didn't look back. He descended the plateau by a goat trail, legs trembling like they belonged to another man. He passed the sealed old entrance, which now looked smaller. Sunlight dried the cold sweat on his brow. He mounted his horse without hurry, stowed the journal in his saddlebag, tied the chain to the saddle like a tool that had saved his life more than once. The gold stayed below, gleaming in the dark for no one. What he carried didn't weigh in any sack, but it had the exact weight of a man who leaves different than he entered. As his heels nudged the horse forward, Luke felt the mind still watching him. Not with hatred, but with a kind of silent agreement. You take nothing from me, I take nothing from you. Today, the earth would let him pass. The daylight blinded him for a few moments, forcing his eyes into a squint as the sun's warmth settled on his skin. With each breath, the desert's dry heat seemed to scrub away the damp heaviness the mine had left in his lungs. There was no gold in his hands, no jewels in his saddlebag. What he carried was the battered journal, the silver pendant at his neck, and the memory of eyes that should never have seen the light. For a moment, he stayed still, just listening. The silence here was different from the one underground, alive, filled with wind between stones, the dry rustle of twisted shrubs, the faint creak of leather under his weight. Down below, the silence had teeth and its own breath. He mounted fully, every muscle reminding him of the long hours of tension. From the saddle, he looked toward the plateau where he'd emerged. The gap he'd escaped through was just a tear in the rock, nothing remarkable, but Luke knew, felt in his own bones, that beyond that crack, the darkness was still awake, guarding its secrets, and maybe waiting for the next soul foolish enough to challenge its depths. He touched the pendant, feeling the gentle coolness of the now calm metal, as if the object had accepted its new owner. He thought of Thomas Grady, the ring found among the bones, and the stories lost with the men who never came back. He understood now. Some things belong to no one. Some treasures carry a price far too high. With every step the horse took, the mine receded behind him, but the sense that he was not alone remained. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was a strange kind of respect, as if he'd made a quiet pact with that place. In the distance, mountains cut the sky with bluish shadows. Luke steered his horse toward them, letting the wind strip away the sweat and dust. He felt lighter, not because he carried less, but because of the clarity the experience had given him. The true wealth wasn't buried in the ground, it was in the understanding he carried now. Some stories are meant to be remembered, and others are better left in the dark. By the time the sun began to lean, painting the desert in golden tones, he stopped his horse for a moment and looked back. He saw no mine, only the endless expanse of land and stone. He smiled faintly, accepting that some answers would never be found. He rode on, his silhouette soon blending into the horizon, the wind erasing every trace of his passing. The pendant, warmed by the sun, rested against his chest, and in his mind remained the certainty that, though he had taken no gold, he had left richer than he came. And if you too believe that some stories are worth preserving, and that not every treasure should be unearthed, leave a like, share this video, and subscribe to Treasures of the West for more tales filled with mystery, courage, and unexpected discoveries. Your journey through the Old West is just beginning.